Great lighting isn't about making your image brighter. It's about controlling levels, creating contrast, depth, and being intentional to achieve your creative vision. In this breakdown, I'll show you how I manage levels and spill to add separation, and how I build contrast in a room already filled with natural light. Because when you light intentionally, you control the final outcome, and that's what leads to consistently professional cinematic results. Let's dive right in. We have this very white room that's a rooftop room, that's a penthouse level, and it's surrounded by windows. And so you can see that there's all these windows, and it's going all around the room and is just flooding the room with daylight, which is awesome. But we also have white walls, white ceilings everywhere that's very reflective. Even the floor, actually, you can see how much light is reflecting off of the floor. And so the challenge when you get to a place like that is, how do I avoid my image to be flat? And what we mean by flat is if everything is at the same brightness level, right? So if those walls are at a certain brightness level and my subject is at the same brightness level and the furniture is at the same brightness level, then it looks very, very flat because there's no shadows, there's no contrast. And then it also makes it very difficult to adjust in post-production, because if you try to adjust your highlights or your midtones, well, they're all linked together because everything is the same level. So you want as much separation as possible between your highlights, midtones, and shadows, but you also want those contrasts just so that you can make the scene a little bit more interesting, or else, again, it's gonna look very one-dimensional. So here's our setup, and one camera straight down the middle, and I'm gonna place my subject on the couch right in the middle of the frame. And so I knew that's the composition, that's the framing that I wanted. And so I start by that. I start by placing the camera, lining everything up, making sure everything is dead center the way I want. And that then tells me where and how I'm gonna light the scene. Even though we have windows directly behind the camera, the sun was actually a lot more in this corner, and it was moving this way, away from the camera and towards the one wall that had no window in the room. And so we knew that as the day progressed, the sun was gonna be less and less of an issue. So we knew that really what we needed to do was to control these three windows. If we had a way to manage the sunlight out of those three windows, then we would be okay. We would be able to then balance everything and kind of control and create the contrast that we wanted. You can see how much light those windows are pushing towards the floor. And literally that was bouncing right back into our subject's face. At first, I took a piece of black cloth. I have a piece of about 8x6 black negative, and I lay it down on the ground. And it barely was enough as far as like covering the area that we needed to cover. And so we decided to instead use this 7x3 pop-up with the black side. And that did two things. So by doing that, and by bringing that pop-up as close as we can to our subject so that it's not in the frame, we block any light that comes from either this window or that window or this window. All of it will be blocked because we're not blocking it coming into the room, we're just blocking it from reaching our subject. And so that helps us quite a bit because now we're not affecting the levels in the room. There's still all that daylight coming into the room, and we're just blocking the area on our subject from being affected by that direct sunlight. And then what it also does is it then creates shadow on the person's face to then be able to create contrast. So when we talk about contrast, we're talking about the difference between their, well, on this case, the key side and the fill side. So you can see it here. I have a light directly onto my left, and that's my key side. So this side of my face is brighter, and I have nothing here. I don't have a neg. I do have a white wall that's further out, so the light is bouncing back a little bit. But there is a contrast, there's a difference between the two. And if I want to make this side darker, all I would need to do is put a piece of black cloth here, as close as I can without being in the frame, and it would create a darker shadow. And so that's achieving that as well. So this pop-up is serving a dual purpose of blocking the light from reaching our subject and also creating a little bit of shadow on their face so that we have the contrast that we want. And so that was super helpful. And we didn't have to move it. Once it was in place, because our subjects are always going to sit in the same spot, then we're good to go. It doesn't matter if the sun is moving, unless it's drastic to the point where now somehow there's sunlight sneaking in on the side of it. And then we would just need to move the pop-up a little bit to the side. But that was not the case. So we were fine. And so that was a great solution to that issue. When you're framing a shot dead center like this, and the person is looking straight into the camera, unless it's motivated, unless the light is motivated by something, like if you see a window on one side, that would be what's called motivated. That means the viewers understand that there's a window here, there's light coming this way, and that would kind of force you to then say, okay, this side is their key side because there's a window there. In this case, I don't have anything motivated that light. So I can really be free to decide which side of his face is going to be brighter than the other. The only thing that forced me into my decision was, again, the fact that I needed to put that pop-up to block that light. And so by putting that pop-up there, I'm creating that shadow on their face. And so now it's dictating that the key light will come from their left side. You can also see that we have another pop-up, and that's also blocking some of that daylight coming in. And I think at one point early on, it was creating some very bright spot here in the background. And so that's why we set up that pop-up. But I believe by the time we were done setting up and we rolled for our first interview, that brightness, that bright spot was already gone. But we left it because it was set up, and we're like, you know what, if we need to move it, if there's another bright spot that show up, it's all ready to go, and we just need to move it into position. So that's the reason for that particular pop-up. And then you can see that we used a tube light. That one was an interesting decision, probably not the best decisions that I made, but I really wanted to create an edge light on their fill side instead of a backlight. And the reality is this room is so bright that my little tube doesn't do much. You see it a little bit. I can show it to you on, like on this one, you can see it a little bit here where we have a little bit of an edge right here around his arm too. That's from the tube light, but it's really not as harsh or as intense as I wanted to. And that's simply because that's the limitation of that tube. And because my framing is so wide, I can't bring the tube closer. It would be in the shot. So that probably wasn't the best decision. So the only other option would have been to use the tube light overhead, outside of the frame to shine some lights directly above him. But even that would have been challenging just because of how far the tube would have need to be so that the stands didn't show in the frame. So we would have had to have a really long arm in order for the tube to reach what we needed to reach. So I probably could have done that. Anyway, just not my best decision on the tube light, but it's okay. So now that we have our equipment kind of placed where we needed to place it, the next decision I need to make is the level of the background. What's the level, what's the brightness level that I want for that room? Not the subject, but the room. And obviously we understand that I can't control these windows and the amount of light coming in. I just don't have enough ND film or negative to block all those windows. So the levels are going to come in, but I can still control the look of that background. And I do that using my ND filter. So I leave my camera settings for creative control. So I leave my aperture open the way I want to create the depth of field that I want. I leave my shutter speed to deal with any flickering of lights that needs to happen. And my ISO is native at 800. And so I don't use my camera settings to control the levels in the room. I just adjusted my ND filters to the levels that I felt comfortable with the background, where it wasn't too dark, because also what I don't want to do is my subject to be so dramatically brighter than the background that it looks completely fake. And you see it all the time where it almost looks like they're shot on the green screen because they're so filled with lights. And most of the time when that happens, it's also they're completely flat, like there's light everywhere on them. There's no contrast. And it just looks fake, like they're not in the real environment because the lighting is completely overdone. And there's so much separation between the background and the subject. So I don't want to do that. I want to find that right level where the background is darker and my subject is brighter than the back, but it still looks natural. And so I adjust my ND filter until I find what I feel comfortable with as far as the background. So then the only thing that's left is to adjust the intensity of the key light to then raise the level on my subject key side to expose properly. And so that's the only thing I'm going to do is control the light, the intensity of that light, to then achieve proper exposure. It's important that you measure your levels. Don't guess. Don't just look at the picture and say, I have separation. Now, do you actually have separation? And so learn to read your scope. If we're looking at the waveform, an indication that I don't have separation is if my waveform was all within a very small range. So if it was all compressed within a small range, then I have very little separation. Now, you got to be careful because this is Rec 709. So this is after applying the LUT back to Rec 709. If you're looking at the S-Log3, this was shot in S-Log3. If you look at the waveform in S-Log3, it will look very compressed because that's what the log format does. It compresses the levels so that they all stay within range. But then when you apply the Rec 709, then it expands. Now you know your highlights are right around the 90% IRE, and then your blacks are in the 12 to 0 IRE, and then you have plenty of room in the midtones. And so now you know you have good separation, and that helps you in post-production because now I can manipulate and add more contrast if I want to, make the background darker if I want to. And so that's a sign of a good exposure because my waveform is spread as far as it possibly can, right? From brightness to shadows. Hopefully this video was helpful in understanding how to use lighting to create more professional looking images. Thanks again and happy filming.